progressive church. Pastor's wearing a Tommy Boy, holy, ho, 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 what does it say? Ho, ho, holy shnikes. That is one, I want to go to that church. Either they're going, man, that sounds cool, or they're going, I want to go to that church. That church sounds like they have a lot of fun. Can anybody remember a time when you were either unprepared or underprepared for very, very cold weather? Can you? Yeah, it's funny is when I thought of this, I started thinking, and I came up with about 5 times, because I'm always hot. It has to be really cold for me to be cold. So I have a lot of those moments where I go, I'll be fine. And it's like, But one in particular was about a year or so after, maybe a little less after Janine and I were married. No, it had to be more than a year now that I think about it, but because we had Nathan. But not much. But anyway, about a year after we had Nathan, or a little less, we had gone to Joshua Tree. I had a friend from this place called Microplex. He was a rock climber. Hey, let's go out to Joshua Tree. It'll be fun. So we went in our Toyota wagon. We had a Toyota wagon, and we slept in the back. And it was freezing. And not only that, Nathan stayed home. He was a baby. Janine had recently weaned Nathan. But the breast milk factories had not gotten the memo, because she was still producing, and it was like this weekend of just like leakage and cold weather, and my feet were sticking out of the back of the Toyota wagon because it wasn't long enough, and it was like, I think it was like 29, and I was like so cold. It was miserable that night, just absolutely miserable. But I can imagine that night that Janine and I spent in Joshua Tree was not nearly as difficult as the one endured by Mary and Joseph, who stumbled into Bethlehem that night, aching and weary and tired, hungry, in pain, because Mary was basically in labor, desperately in need of a place to have a baby. I think we can all agree, right? After a long trip, we just want to relax, right, and recharge. Think of a long trip. And the thing is, when we say long trips, we're talking in planes and air-conditioned minivans with coolers full of our favorite snacks, right, jerky and stuff. They didn't have that, obviously. I imagine that one night of mine was not nearly as difficult as theirs. Joseph undoubtedly was in no mood to hear the answer he got when he inquired of the innkeeper if they could, the availability of a place to stay. What did the innkeeper say? No room, or something to the effect of no room at the inn, right? And the inn was obviously not the Ritz-Carlton or even a Motel 6. Scholars love the debate over the years of what exactly the place where they laid their head was. What was the inn? Some believe that these roadside inns were nothing more than little huts that perhaps surrounded a central area where people's livestock could be kept. Others speculate that it was nothing more than a cave, a small cave that had been carved out of the side of a mountain. For sure, it was a temporary shelter at best. Whatever the case, we know it was much less extravagant than even the seediest of the hotels we have today. I would bet that neither Mary or Joseph were filled with much Christmas cheer at that time. I bet the angel's words to them, and remember an angel had visited both of them, were the furthest thing from their minds, particularly Mary, because remember, she was in labor, right? When Joseph and Mary agreed to God's plan for them both, they likely did not envision having to make the 90-mile journey from Nazareth to Bethlehem. But nonetheless, here they were. So who was it that answered the door, if it was a door, that night to Mary and Joseph and gave them the bad news? Who is this villain that we have been mad at for over 2,000 years, right? The villain, the innkeeper. Why couldn't he have found them a better place for pregnant Mary, right? The Bible doesn't give us a whole lot to go on about this person. We don't get a description of who it was that spoke those words, or perhaps wagged their index finger at a sign that had been painted in cow dung, right? Probably not, but that's the way I like to think of it. And that said, no vacancy. But we can be sure, though, that someone was there. Someone was there to give them the bad news. And the rest has been left up to the wanderings of our collective imaginations for over 2,000 years. One thing we can be sure of, though, absolutely sure, right? This was no ordinary night. Over the years, many travelers had indeed passed by these huts or whatever they were, perhaps spending a night or two. They're unknown, those people, unknown and long forgotten. But on this sacred night, an ordinary couple inquired about lodging, and their names are forever etched in history and in our hearts. We're not completely even sure what the lodgings were, but the guests, though, are the important. The guests are what are etched in our minds. And this scene, right, is forever painted in our minds and brought to life each Christmas when we sing songs like Silent Night and O Little Town of Bethlehem, right? Don't you just conjure up those visions of the little baby in this manger? 2,000 years later, we've not exhausted the sacredness and the majesty and the awesomeness of that night. Each year, we're once again awed, perhaps even brought to tears when we ponder the newborn baby, Jesus, who was needy, hungry, crying, completely dependent, probably dirty, and yet mysteriously divine. No matter how many Christmases we've lived and will live through, each year we're able to ponder this mystery again and again. And no doubt though, this mysterious divinity of this night was not on the mind of the innkeeper that night. For this guy, basically, for him, it was just another night, really. And most likely it was a little bit busier than usual because remember Caesar had ordered a census, so that's why they were traveling from Nazareth to Bethlehem. So there was undoubtedly the population of the city had been bloated temporarily by the census, so it might have been a little busier, but I picture this guy making his final rounds, closing up shop to relax for the night. Then shows up this couple on his doorstep. It was an inconvenience for him, something he had not planned for. He certainly was not prepared, no matter how well prepared he would have been. He was not prepared for the Son of God to show up on his doorstep in the middle of the night. But isn't that how our God has shown up time and time again throughout history, right? In surprising and unexpected ways. The people of God have such a rich history with the God of surprises. The parting of the Red Sea, a child born to the way beyond childbearing age, Sarai and Abraham, and a mighty king risen in the form of a ruddy-faced shepherd boy named David, manna provided for the hungry sojourners in the desert, and on and on. God is a God of surprises and provision. And here he is again this night with the greatest and most spectacular surprise of all, the unborn Savior of the world on the doorstep of a crude inn in this tiny town of Bethlehem. Caesar certainly didn't know that by calling a census, he was basically lending aid to raising up a better king than himself, the King of Kings. And the innkeeper undoubtedly had no doubt when he was dusting off that trough or whatever it was that would be used as a crib, that it would hold the greatest human being to ever be born. And the other travelers had no idea, right, who their next door neighbor for the night would be. God incarnate in the form of a little baby boy and these two humble parents. Yet there they were. And here we are today, over 2,000 years later, still in awe and wonder. And we marvel at the mystery of this scene. But today we're focusing on the innkeeper. And for him, this couple had disrupted his routine, right? Gotten in his mojo, disrupted his evening walkthrough. We don't even know his name, yet he's been a key player in the nativity story for many, many years. Or what about the other travelers, the other undoubtedly weary travelers that were there too? What about them? They had no idea who they were sleeping next to, right? And you know how it is, rowdy. How many of you have ever been in a hotel or a motel and you're next door to some noisy neighbors, right? Right? Yeah, and I know, I'm sure, like for me, I'm sure, without being too crazy, because 1, 2, how many of my mentors are here? Anyway, it can conjure up all different kinds of sights and sounds. But anyway, we won't go there. But you've all had those neighbors that are crazy, right, next to you, whatever that may be. I remember we were in a Motel 6 once in Escondido, and I swear all night long there was like drug deals and shootings and stabbings. The police were in and out of this parking lot all night long, but they didn't have that back then. But what about the other people there? What about the other people that were staying where Mary and Joseph were? What did they think when the shepherds came pouring in, kind of like groupies in a rock band, and all of a sudden they're worshiping this baby, right? Did they join in? Did they like scoff? Or did they just sleep through the night? Well, obviously we'll never know that. And we can't judge the innkeeper, even though we have 2,000 years of hindsight, right? But we're tempted to judge him and go, come on, dude, you couldn't have found a better place, a little bit better place than a trough for the Savior of the world. Like the innkeeper, though, we too are often disrupted in our own personal lives by Jesus. You see, we can be super religious, super pious, until it really costs us something. When our Christianity becomes inconvenient in the middle of the night. Remember how I've said that servanthood is always inconvenient because nobody ever calls you up on a Sunday afternoon when you're just sitting there going, man, I wish I could be of service right now. Nobody ever calls you up then. They call you up in the middle of the night when you're sleeping, right? But we can be super religious when it fits our schedule. But when it becomes inconvenient, it can be a problem. You see, we would love a Jesus who forms himself around our schedules and who can just be sort of sprinkled on top of our already pretty much cast in concrete agendas. But what happens? Jesus just busts right in, right? And just like Joseph and Mary did on that starry sacred night in Bethlehem, Jesus often asks us to drop our nets, to follow him, or perhaps even drop our dreams and our ambitions to follow him. This is the same Jesus that came for us as a people when we were apathetic, uninterested, and uninformed sinners. This is the Jesus who knocked at the door that had, remember, no handle on the outside. This is that same Jesus. But here we are. Today we have him unborn, soon to burst onto the world, all God and all man, and certainly all mystery, because that just boggles people's minds, including mine, even today. Frederick Buechner, in his book called The Hungering Dark, says this, and this I think is a great quote. Those who believe in God can never, in a way, ever be sure of him again. Once they've seen him in a stable, they can never be sure where he will appear or to what lengths he will go or to what ludicrous depths of self-humiliation he will descend to in his wild pursuit of man. There's no time or place so lowly, so earthbound, but that holiness can be present there too. Where we least expect him, he appears most fully. He invades our lives. He goes where there is no room, so we may find a home in him. The one who had no home is making a home for us. The one who had no place to lay his head is our resting place, our eternal comfort and joy. In the end, the innkeeper, whoever he was, found room for Jesus and Mary and Joseph. May we also find room for him this holiday season and welcome the one who loves us more than we can ever possibly imagine. Amen.